The FIFA World Cup is back and football fans around the world absolutely cannot contain their excitement because the 4-year tournament, the 4-year wait for this tournament is over at last, and fans can now finally get back to seeing the best of best players in action all on the same international stage. Now, the beauty of the FIFA World Cup is that because there have been so many editions and because the sport as a whole is such a global one, there have been a number of World Cup finals and there have been a number of very thrilling finals too at that. So we thought we'd try and do a little ranking of which finals we thought were the best, and we picked out 5 here and this is just my opinion, by the way. You can feel free to disagree with it, and if you do, don't forget to let me know in the comments. But this is what we think are the 5 best FIFA World Cup finals, ranked in order in which I will be showing it to you guys right now. So at number 5 we have the 1950 FIFA World Cup final. Now this one admittedly is a little bit of cheating. Why do I hear you ask? Well, because 1950 was the only year where the FIFA World Cup wasn't decided by a single knockout final, but was in fact decided by a round-robin league format. The reason for that, well, because of the Second World War, the World Cups weren't held in 1942 and 1946, and due to the fact that a lot of countries were still suffering financially and otherwise in the aftermath of that war, there weren't that many nations who actually traveled to Brazil to play the World Cup. But that last match of the group stage, of the single round-robin group stage, is one that is widely remembered by football fans across the world. Why? Because it was being hosted in Brazil and Brazil were playing that match, and all they really needed was a draw against Uruguay to secure their first ever World Cup final. And they were in fact favorites to win that title because the last 2 games before that last match, they had won by margins of 7-1 and 8-1. Brazil were flying and Uruguay were being taken lightly, and yet that is something that they actually ended up using to their advantage, because once Brazil took the lead at one point, it seemed like at that point the match was all but over in the final. However, Uruguay ended up equalizing, but even that wouldn't necessarily be enough for them to actually clinch the title. They needed a win because only that win would move them ahead of Brazil and into first place in that group stage. So what happens? Brazil started getting desperate to find another goal, or at least hang on to the fact that they were still being drawn. But Uruguay ended up getting a late winner, and that actually ended up sending Brazil into stunned silence. I mean that literally, because the stadium where it was played was called the Maracana. That was in fact the first time a match had been played in the Maracana. It had 200,000 people approximately witnessing the match, and people were sent into stunned silence when Uruguay scored that last goal and clinched the World Cup. In fact, some people were so shocked at the result that they actually ended up dying of heart attacks, and that event ended up becoming known as the Maracanazo, only to be outdone by the Minerazo, which happened in 2014. But let's not really talk about that. Let's focus on World Cup finals and thrilling World Cup finals at that. At number 4, we have the 1958 World Cup final. Now, this one is thrilling for very, very obvious reasons, and in fact was the start of a redemption story of sorts for Brazil, who, after losing that final in 1950, would go on to win 5 World Cups, and 1958 was the first of them. The tournament was being held that year in Sweden, and of course Sweden were also playing the final, so there was an expectancy that they might be able to put up a fight. However, that Brazil team had a certain 17-year-old who you may just have heard of. His name was Pelé, and he ended up influencing that final massively, just as he had influenced the knockout stages prior. Now, what most people don't remember is that Pelé had actually been injured for the group stages, but Brazil managed to make it through to the knockouts, and once they had Pelé playing, they were all but unstoppable because he scored goals for fun, and that included 2 goals in the final as Brazil romped home, going 5-2 winners and claiming their first of 5 World Cups. You heard that right? Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. 5 World Cups, and this indeed was the place where it all started. At number 3, we have the 1970 World Cup final. Now, the reason this is special is because you remember that Brazil team I was just talking about? Well, this was the World Cup that saw them win their 3rd title and in fact take home the original Jules Rimet trophy, which was the first World Cup trophy for good. Not just that, it also cemented them as arguably one of the most dominant teams at that level, because not only did they win the World Cup in 58, they also won it in 62 and then ended up doing what in modern parlances we'd call the three-peat by winning it in 1970. And the 1970 team, well, that was a very, very special team because, of course, not only was Pele still playing and very much at the peak of his powers, but you also had forwards like Jairzinho, Rivellino alongside him, all of whom were part of that team, and they were playing some very, very dazzling special football. The most interesting thing was that they were coached by Carlos Alberto Torres, the man who actually captained them to World Cup victory in 1958. Thus, that man not only became the first coach to actually win the World Cup as both coach and captain. Two other men have done it since. We'll cover that just in a while. But this team, this Brazil team, was something special because they excelled at blowing teams away for fun, and that's exactly what they did in this particular final. Now again, 1970, Pele ended up scoring the first goal, but Italy poached an equalizer from a defensive mistake made by Brazil. However, in the second half, Brazil absolutely overwhelmed the rather conservative and defensive approach put in place by the Italians. They scored 3 more goals, and the last goal was a thing of beauty because it involved the ball being touched by 9 players in a passing routine that actually saw the ball pass throughout the pitch and then finished in a wonderful manner. This was Brazilian samba football at its finest, and believe me, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend you go out and search for it. Really is a thing of beauty. At number 2, we have another final that took place in Mexico in the AajTak Stadium. The 1970 saw Pele being crowned champion for the 3rd time, and 1986 saw the crowning of the man himself, Diego Maradona. Now again, 86 is forever remembered as Maradona's World Cup, especially after the kind of showing he had put up against England, where he of course scored two memorable goals but for very different reasons in the quarter-final. Remember, he first scored the hand of God and then scored that iconic goal where he dribbled past 5 players before putting the ball into the back of the net. However, the 1986 final was a lot closely contested than many of us actually care to remember it, because again, if you remember, Argentina took the lead. They were 2-0 up in the first half, but in the second half, the Germans scored 2 goals from Karl-Heinz Rummenigge and Rudi Völler, and that meant that going into the last 15 or so minutes, the game was actually leveled on 2-2 each, and the West Germans actually had some momentum. Thankfully for them, Barachuga, known as Barru, ended up scoring the winning goal for Argentina, and then that forever immortalized that World Cup as being the one where Diego Maradona played a very, very key role in giving Argentina their second and so far last title. Doubtless you'll be thinking, what exactly could number 1 be? Well, wait no further. Number 1, 2006 World Cup final that was held in Germany. Now, there's a reason I picked this one out as number 1, because quite frankly, this World Cup final, and indeed everything that preceded it, really had everything. If you're a fan of a controversial red card, that had it. If you're a fan of wonderful goals, you had it. And if you're a fan of a penalty shootout, well, this World Cup was definitely the one for you. You'd remember, of course, that, this World Cup final is always remembered for Zidane's headbutt on Marco Materazzi and the subsequent sending off, and the fact that France would eventually go on to lose the game on penalties. But I think a special mention must also be given to the way the Italians played, because they were pretty smart with their football. They actually took the lead and France had to equalize. But then, as the game wore on, they realized that penalties would be their best bet to win, especially now that Zidane wasn't playing for the French and he had been sent off. And so they took it deep to penalties. They won the World Cup. In fact, this was the second World Cup after 1994 that was decided on a penalty shootout. But this was a very special win for the Italians. Why? Because the year before that had been a year to forget for football in Italy. You had the Calciopoli scandal, and for those of you who don't know, it was basically a scandal that rocked the Serie A, the top league in Italy, wherein there was match-fixing allegations and referee bribing and a lot of corruption. Again, there's plenty of things out there. Go and find it. So they were in some degree of turmoil, and both Juventus and AC Milan had actually been relegated to the second division. So football in Italy was not in a good place, but the Italian national team, the Azzurri, gave their countrymen something to smile about with what I think is arguably the best World Cup final to date. And that's the end of our list. What do you think is your favorite World Cup final? Do you agree with this list, or do you think there was something I missed out on, or maybe could have actually included instead of one of those options? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and tap that bell icon so you know when we're going live or uploading some new videos for you guys. Then you can also go ahead and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to stay tuned for the channel. We have lots more coming for you if you want some good coverage for the FIFA World Cup. Thank you all once again for joining us. As always, I've been Shane Dias. I hope to see you with us through the day, but for now, goodbye.